Recording of a program called Erie Canal Legacy, the Honeoye Falls Mendon Historical Society, March 1st, year 2001, done by Andy Olenick and Richard Reisem.
Joined by two distinguished presenters, Andy Olenick and Richard Reisem. Andy is the photographer who shot the pictures in the book, and Richard is the individual who wrote the text. They collaborated to write The Making of the Erie Canal Legacy. This is a very timely subject for us because of our recent presentations on the Erie Canal, the Genesee Valley Canal, and now we're carrying that forward and putting it into text and into pictures. So I'd like to welcome Andy and Richard. And gentlemen, we'd like to hear from you.
Thank you. I'm Richard. Oh, wow, that works, doesn't it? I bet you all can hear me, way back there. Well, good evening, everyone. Good to see you all. I'm about to make a statement that you may seem is hyperbole, but it is absolutely true. The Erie Canal is the single most important public work ever built in the United States. No other government project, state or federal, had a more profound influence upon our country. Consider the following. The Erie Canal dramatically changed the course of American history. It focused economic growth on the United States rather than to Canada after the bitter war of 1812, when British Canada was the enemy. It was an important factor affecting the outcome of the Civil War because it made the North the influential developer of America's Midwest and made the North the superior industrial power. It overcame prodigious obstacles to become a masterpiece of construction. It created the science of engineering in the U.S., which led to America's predominance in the Industrial Revolution. It transformed the state of New York from a wilderness into the agricultural, industrial, commercial, and financial center of the country in the 19th century. It made New York the Empire State and built the lasting heritage that is the subject of our book, Erie Canal Legacy. Now, I won't have time to address each of these topics, but let me talk briefly about the prodigious obstacles and the creation of the science of engineering. And now, if we could have lights. The building of the canal became the country's first school of engineering. It was largely American ingenuity applied to every problem they faced. Now comes the fun part. I have to ad-lib for about 10 minutes. And it's not the bulb? It is the bulb. This is the nice thing about presentations like this. You know, you depend on technology. I'll tell you, back in 1817, when they built the Erie Canal, There was no technology in this country. I mean, everything was Yankee ingenuity. It was unbelievable what they had to do in order to build that canal. And it's an absolutely fascinating story. All parts of it are really quite interesting. I'm going to be telling you some anecdotes about the canal in the Rochester area. How many of you, by the way, are you all live in Honeoye Falls or Mendon? Is that true? Oh, yeah. Anybody here from Rochester? Okay. Any people here live on the canal or very near it? Good for you. Does anyone here remember when the great embankment near Bushnell's Basin collapsed? Aha! Was anyone living down in the valley? Oh, good for you. I think, what did it wiped out like something like 30 or 40 houses, I think, at that time. That wasn't the first time that it happened on the Erie Canal. There was another time when, and it was a similar situation. Of course, the last one that happened was a situation where the construction crews were digging around too close to the base of the canal. They didn't realize how deep that canal was at that time. And so they just knocked a hole in the bottom of the canal. The first time was very similar in the sense that they had put in order to allow Irondequoit Creek to flow through the area, they had made a great big huge culvert. And but they had missed the idea that they needed to seal it very, very carefully with the hydraulic cement that they invented as a result of getting involved with the Erie Canal construction. And so again, a small hole appeared in the bottom of the canal, and of course as the water started flowing through it, it just enlarged the hole larger and larger until we had a double the intensity of the Irondequoit Creek at the time. Well, let me get back to about the fact that the building of the Erie Canal became the first school of engineering in our country. It was largely American ingenuity applied to every problem that they faced. They cut through the great Montezuma swamp in watery slime up to the workers' chests and built the impressive Richmond Aqueduct, which crossed the Seneca River on 31 stone arches, one of the longest bridges anywhere in its day. It was just one of numerous stone aqueducts, one of which at 1,137 feet was the longest stone arch bridge in the world. They built the longest canal in the world with 83 locks to raise boats 565 feet from the Hudson River to Lake Erie. They amassed 3 enormous earth embankments, one of them 1,320 feet long, extending across a mile-long valley, 70 feet above the valley floor. The low end of one embankment appears in the background, with a canal worker and his mule in the foreground. And they did the whole project in 8 years. It would have been easier to build the pyramids. Much of the canal was built through virgin forest, and an efficient means of eliminating trees was urgently needed. One device, a tree feller, which was operated by one man, could pull down any size tree in minutes. The stump left behind was pulled out by another novel device, the stump puller. With it, 7 workers and 4 horses could extract 40 large tree stumps a day. Cutting out 3 miles of solid rock, 30 feet deep, presented a number of problems one of which was getting 1.5 million cubic yards of rock that had been blasted by gunpowder out of the deep channel. Orange Dibble, a canal engineer, devised a boom that lowered large buckets to the bottom of the cut, where they were filled with rocks that were pulled up to the bank by cables harnessed to horses. These cranes were set up every 70 feet along the deep cut. In the history of U.S. canal construction, nothing compared to the amazing 5 double locks, 5 going up, 5 going down, that raised and lowered boats a height of over 50 feet in Lockport. The first locks were opened and closed by manpower, as you can see in this picture. Adelbert Whalen operated this cargo boat on the Erie Canal. The workman who built it posed for the photograph. The boat has just been slipped into the canal on greased boards. Tolls were collected for cargo boats on the Erie Canal at waylocks, like this one built in Greek Revival style, circa 1850. Boats entered the lock, the water was drained, and a huge balance beam scale weighed the cargo-laden vessel, subtracted the registered weight of the boat, and levied the resulting toll. A canal cargo boat called a ballhead or bullhead crosses the aqueduct over the Genesee River in Rochester. The Erie Canal flowed right through the downtowns of cities on the waterway. At the far left, you can see barrels of flour stacked in front of Rochester City Hall. The low bridge is at Exchange Street. The Rochester Aqueduct is in the foreground, with the Court Street Bridge visible behind it. Canal boats had to make a sharp 90-degree turn at this point on the east side of the Rochester Aqueduct. This aqueduct still exists on the lower level of the Broad Street Bridge. Here we are looking in the opposite direction toward the Court Street Bridge and Lehigh Valley Railroad Station. Construction of the Erie Canal received worldwide attention and awe. It was the 19th century's wonder of the world. Enoch Woods and Sons, Staffordshire, England, produced blue and white china in sets of plates and pictures depicting notable canal scenes such as the Albany Basin, seen here, the Little Falls Aqueduct, which was the longest one on the canal, and the Rochester Aqueduct. The inscription on this plate reads, "The Grand Erie Canal, a splendid monument of the enterprise and resources of the state of New York." Before I turn this program over to Andy Olenick and his beautiful pictures, I have a few of my own amateur slides to show you as we take a brief trip on the canal with some Buffalo friends of mine. This is the remains of one of the pair of 5 locks in Lockport that raised boats over 50 feet, 5 locks going up and 5 going down. These 5 original locks now provide a spillway for water from the Niagara River that feeds the canal all the way to Rochester. This is looking up at that spillway. On the right, you can see one of the 2 locks that now do the job of the original 5. And here's our happy crew. The ostensible reason for this trip is to give Sister B, who is second from the left, a ride from Buffalo to a Mass she is scheduled to attend in Medina. An excursion boat waits to be lowered 50 feet through 2 locks. Carolyn Whaley, wife of the captain, is on the left with Captain Fred Whaley behind her. Carolyn and Sister B consider the question, will Sister B make it to Mass in Medina on time? They are optimistic. Notice that we are descending into the abyss. Joe Dispenza protects the boat from scraping on the rough walls of the lock, while Nellie Bradley and Judy Goodyear seem unconcerned about the first 25-foot descent into the abyss. The final lock gates begin to open, allowing 3 boats, including the excursion boat, into the lower level of the canal. The gates are fully open, and we can proceed. Looking back on the locks in which we descended, the wide, perfectly level canal opens up before us. Bridge ahead. But it's not a lift bridge, so we don't need to signal to have it raised. We pass some undistinguished scenery and some historic scenery. Here's a pleasant canal-side brick house from the 1820s. It's determined that we're late and need to hurry. This speed, which creates waves that strike the vulnerable canal banks, is totally illegal. But there is no one around. I still may be arrested. We make it to Medina. Is Sister B on time? Well, no. She has missed the Mass, but arrived in time for the best part, the champagne reception. The rest of us walk around looking at Medina stone buildings in the village. And there are lots of them, some in grayish Medina stone, and some in reddish. We leave Sister B to the champagne reception, and the rest of us turn the boat around and go to Middleport to have a wonderful dinner at the Basket Factory. Now, the village of Medina would not exist if it weren't for what happened 400 million years ago. In the Silurian period, streams flowing into this area deposited sand, which solidified under pressure from water and increasing layers of sand. Then the water receded, leaving the sandstone. The deposit extends from Hamilton, Ontario, through the Niagara Gorge, and beyond Rochester to Fulton, New York. Geologists gave the reddish-brown stone the name Medina Sandstone, and the area around the village that bears the name of the stone possessed the best deposits. Almost all of it has now been mined and shipped out, mostly via the Erie Canal, to cities around the world where the stone was fashioned into the massive 19th century architectural structures that we find everywhere today, especially in New York City and London. It was at an Albion stone quarry where one day the stone cutters split a particularly great slab and out jumped a live frog. The event naturally created a sensation among villagers, and there was much speculation about how a frog got inside a giant slab of stone and survived. Some people decided it was the second coming of Christ. As a frog? Finally, analytical minds studied the situation and concluded that there was a small crevice in the stone through which water had flowed. When a mere tadpole, the frog passed into the tiny fissure and lived in a small cavity, eating whatever the coursing water brought it. The frog may have lived there as briefly as a matter of months while growing into an adult, or perhaps even for years with an adequate food supply. Well, I'm running out of time, but not out of Erie Canal stories. I'm leaving the best ones for you to discover in the book itself. Thank you very much. This is a two-part presentation here tonight, so the second segment is the photographic part with beautiful slides taken by Andy Olenick, the photographer of the book. And here to present them is Andy himself.
Microphone here has its mind of its own and wants to go everywhere as we don't want it to go. Anyway, thanks for braving the weather tonight. We can always predict when we're going to give a program. Usually the weather becomes a disaster. It's like taking pictures for the various books that we work on. Obviously, you have to try and predict what's going to happen down the road. Richard, you didn't tell me here you can't see the audience with the light the way it is up here.
You can't see a thing.
You can't see a thing. Probably most of you folks don't know Richard and myself, but we produced a number of books together. The Erie Canal Legacy book is our third in the line of books, and we started many years ago, back in 1990, with the 200 Years of Rochester Architecture and Gardens book. And before we got working on the Erie Canal Legacy book, we had to take a little bit of time off to recharge our batteries, to kind of recoup our senses and start our planning and our researching and writing and the final photography for this new book, the Erie Canal Legacy. And oh, by the way, if we didn't have enough on our plates already while we were working on this particular book, Richard also was able to garner another book in Buffalo based on our 200 Years of Rochester Architecture and Gardens book. And we ended up having two books within the same 3.5-year period of time. And obviously we probably needed to have our head examined, because essentially the 200 Years book alone took over 3 years by itself. And to date, though, fortunately, both books are published, the Buffalo book as well as the Erie Canal Legacy book. And while we were working on both of these, obviously, we have projects, for instance, that we accumulate a lot of information on, and such as statistics of mileage and how long does it take to do something, and how do you keep things organized. One of the first things we needed to do is a friend of mine who is a computer guru as well as a photographer put together a little program for me to be able to keep track of all this information. With the Buffalo book, we had roughly 300 to 400 locations that we had potential use for, and the same thing with the Erie Canal Legacy book. And it's rather mind-boggling to try to keep all of these things organized and also figure out where you're going to be in any given day. So this little program helped me put together the time of day that I would like to take the picture for the house, the property owner's name, any other pertinent information such as the age of the house, who the contact person was, and anything else we felt that was necessary. After we took our sample test photographs, we would then make a copy of the information and put it together with the photograph, and we organized them in a series of 3 binders. for the Erie Canal Legacy book, and we also did a special binder for the Buffalo book. And with the Erie Canal Legacy book, it was broken up just like the book itself is into 3 sections: Eastern section, Central section, and Western section. And while we were working, for instance, on the Buffalo book, we concentrated primarily on the western section of the Erie Canal. We work in what we call photographic loops because you are chasing light every day, and you're always going to be at a different place at a different time to be able to capture different buildings. And that's the only way that you can, for instance, do these kinds of projects in any short amount of time. You have to be very well organized and know that you're going to be in this town at a particular time, in the next town or the next street, or whatever it may be, to get the photographs you need. But after we would accumulate the paperwork for our locations, we had a volunteer who worked with us at the Landmark Society. His name was Robert Vogt. And it was his job, once we actually put together these information sheets, to get the property releases from the people that we were considering having in our book. And it's very important for us to have a property release and also to have the cooperation of the property owners, because they know their homes best, they know how it will photograph best because of the landscaping or plantings and things of that nature that really kind of help embellish the house. Well, Bob worked with Holy Sepulchre Church, and as you may know, Saturday Night Live used to have their skit with what they called Church Lady. Well, to us, Bob was our church man. And there's a reason for that little analogy there, because when Bob would take trips for us, either looking for buildings himself when he would go off to organ recitals and things like that over in the Albany area, we would say, Bob, if you see an interesting place that we should include in the book, take a couple of photographs and bring them back. However, here's the Erie Canal Legacy book according to Bob. And actually, Bob's already figured out what our next subject is. It's going to be churches in the Erie Canal. So, and he's not far off the mark, because thank God, the most surviving pieces of architecture seem to be the churches along this path. But while we're on the subject of the scouting and the shooting and the trips that we've taken, here's one of your first statistics. To date, my wife and I have actually put on 34,000 miles on our car, and that kind of mileage roughly converts into 97 trips of about 350 miles each, and or 1.5 times around the world, crisscrossing the back roads along the canal path. And these were replaced, by the way, with Firestone Firehawk tires, which are now a part of my recall. Anyway, time on the road, though, has given my wife a lot of time to read books, because once we get to a location, I set up my cameras and start to take Polaroid pictures, and for the most part, her job, which has been doing all the documenting and inputting of information, is pretty much done. But it's been very important to have my wife with me, because she's got a very creative eye, and she helps me compose photographs quite often. However, I think I need to get her one of these t-shirts from the wireless catalog, because to date she's read actually 35 books, and that little quote as it goes, so many books in so little time. And this next shot, by the way, is our house over in Leroy, which we don't get a lot of time to spend at, because Henry McCartney, our director from the Landmark Society, has chosen to put us up in these luxury hotels, such as the Stardust Motor Inn, and we did stay here. We're very thankful to have this place to stay one night, because when you are traveling along the Erie Canal path during the summer months, I'm sure that a lot of you folks have actually had this experience at different times. One of the problems that we have, we never know where we're going to be. Because, as I said, when you chase light, for instance, you may think you're going to end up in one particular place, and you end up 50 or 60 miles away from there. So it's really difficult for us to actually lock in on a motel. One of the other downsides is during the summertime, when does the sun go down? 8 or 9 o'clock at night. So I try to take advantage of all that late afternoon and evening raking light. Well, that puts me at a real disadvantage when it comes to getting a hotel. And especially when you're traveling over the 4th of July weekend and you really want to be in the Oneida area or east of Syracuse a little bit, and you're also going to be contending with the Boilermaker 500 in Utica, New York. So when your original destination was, say, Rome, we had to stay roughly 150 miles away in Schenectady. So, but, along the way, though, we've met an incredible number of great people. I think one of the real advantages for Richard and I on these projects, they're both educational to us, but we really get to meet a lot of really nice people across the state. However, when you drive up to someone's house on a weekend, and you've got all sorts of books in your hand, which we normally carry with us to show people what we're doing, and my log books that I need to take down information. People like their privacy on the weekend. It's like the telemarketers every night from 5 to 9 o'clock. If somebody's always bugging you, you really don't want somebody walking up to you in your yard that looks like they're selling Bibles or encyclopedias or something like that. However, we had a case in point when we were in Gasport, New York. Real nice lady by the name of Mrs. Bermudez. She was out gardening, and when she saw me coming, she had a pitchfork in one hand and a spade shovel in the other hand, and both of the heads of the items went plummeting into the ground, and she says, "I hope you're not selling anything, because I'm not buying." However, fortunately for us, she did buy into our project. Her family owns this particular house in the Gasport area, and it has been within her family since it was built. Her family also brought cold storage to Western New York and hold the first patents on the cold storage within our state. And she also had this lithograph of the way the property was originally designed and built, and it is virtually intact as you see it in this lithograph today. Everything has grown up a lot since then. But the original cold storage building, which is in the lower left-hand corner, it shows you the proximity to the canal and obviously the railroad systems that came after, how important it was for us to have this link to the heritage of the Erie Canal and what it really meant to the canal system. But if you think traveling the roads, back and forth like Charles Perrault did is all fun and frolic, this next photograph made us keenly aware of paying attention was all about on a late sunny afternoon. I guess you can't expect traveling the 34,000 miles that we have and not at some point having a near miss or some other kind of occurrence or a real close call. We were traveling 55 miles an hour going east near Kirkville, New York, which is just a little bit east of Syracuse. We came onto this little T intersection, and you'll notice that the sign 290 and the small Christmas tree to the right-hand side, the distance between that tree and that sign is roughly about 10 or 12 feet. And I had noticed a young gentleman in a small pickup truck coming out of the house that's behind the stockade fence or whatever that's on your left-hand side, coming up to the intersection. Now, mind you, I'm doing 55, and he's not stopping. So I had to make a snap decision whether to go between those that tree and that particular sign, or to hit them broadside. So we made the choice of going between the tree and the sign. Luckily we made it. Wasn't any real problem, fortunately. A lot of skidding and a lot of, tire noises and all that sort of stuff. And obviously we were all shaken up by this because this is not exactly how you want to end your day. Unfortunately for him, he did live right next to that intersection, and I was obviously upset and was going to give him a piece of my mind about being more mindful of how he drives. However, I saw his mother come out of the house. So I pulled up to him and I figured, at this particular point, his mother is going to give him more of a tongue lashing than I ever will. And I just said, next time, pay a little bit more attention to where you're going. Anyway, one of the biggest problems that we face in dealing with projects like this, you can be as organized as you want, but if the weather does not cooperate with you, it makes it very, very difficult to be able to plan your weekend. When you're in a locale such as Rochester and we're doing a local book, or even in Buffalo for that matter, it made it very easy because when you wake up in the morning, you look outside, you figure, oh, it's pretty decent out, I can go take some pictures today. Now mind you, we have to be up at 5 or so in the summertime because we want to catch first light, and we then catch the last light, so it makes for a very long day. However, we had to really spend a lot of time depending on the weather people when we started working in the Albany area, because we had to devote a weekend for the most part to doing that kind of stuff. But to the weather people, though, we found out in the Mohawk Valley, this was a sunny day. And actually, we came to find out that this was really not far from the truth in the fall because of the nature of the geology of the area. You got a lot of hills and valleys, and you dealt with a lot of fog that had, a few hours before it lifted, usually until noon or so. And if you're also over in the Vischer Ferry area, this is a cloudy day to those guys over there for whatever reason in the fall. And we were really lucky that we didn't pay attention to their weather predictions, because we probably would have not gotten this particular photograph. And oh, by the way, if you're up in the Buffalo area and you're looking for 3.5 or 4 feet of snow, you can be sure you're going to get it. As we did in this particular case, my tripod that I work with extends to 9 feet, and it is fully extended. Most of it is buried in the snow, and I'm not wearing snowshoes for comfort, let me tell you that. Anyway, one of the things that we really counted on is the fact that whatever the weather people say it's going to be, it's always going to be completely the opposite. But once we get to a location, we need to really decide on how we're going to photograph a building, because obviously we have a book to be published, and obviously pages within that book have a particular format, and you have to make sure that you have the right amount of vertical photographs, the right amount of horizontal photographs, because you have to have some diversity. But sometimes it takes some unusual angles and some unusual uses, non-OSHA approved uses, by the way, of a step ladder in order to be able to get rid of some of the encumbrances we come across every day, such as telephone poles, one-way signs, things of that nature, in order to get a rather dramatic photograph of a house like this in Little Falls, New York. And in this particular shot, we're dealing with a very tall and narrow church, St. Paul's in Buffalo, New York. And one of the problems we were going to deal with if I didn't take this dramatic angle was that it was so tall and narrow, it really wasn't going to fit the format of our book. However, I'm not napping, I'm not drunk, and I had to try to explain this to the policeman that I was not, unconscious or whatever. but I was just trying to make a dramatic photograph of this church, and sometimes you have to do things like this. When you're in the Albany area, by the way, we were there taking some photographs of the inside of the Senate chamber of the Capitol. And we missed our little window of light to do this very next shot. And it was one of our last shots of the book. And obviously Albany's 4.5 hours away, and I wasn't really going to make another 7-hour round trip to try to catch one picture. But what I had to do was to stake my claim to a piece of the road, because obviously I'm right in where the bus normally likes to pull in to pick up their passengers. Wasn't exactly happy, but sometimes you have to do that to catch this little window of light that was passing down the street. And people say, oh yeah, you must have planned that for years and whatever. I was saving my butt, because this little strip of light, we were having lunch, and I had seen it as it was coming down the street, and I figured a way to be able to salvage this photograph, and I thought really worked rather well. Now, one of the other things that my wife does for me within the studio, besides being my traveling companion and my partner and also my studio manager, she obviously takes care of all the bills. Now, one of the first bills that she pays every month religiously is my life insurance policy. She's convinced that one of these days I'm going to push the envelope just a little bit too far, set the tripod in the right place, and I'm going to really back off and fall into the water or whatever it may be. But in order to get sometimes the dramatic angles to create the nice sweeps for this aqueduct in Camillus, New York, it's rather important sometimes to put yourself on a little bit of a perch. Now, we've accumulated at this particular point a massive amount of information and paperwork and slides, and now you have to try to figure out how are you going to deal with it all. Well, Richard had logged out the number of towns that we have along the Erie Canal, roughly 150 small port towns and whatever, and obviously we have to organize that. So what we did was to organize all of our film exactly as the book was going to be laid out from Albany to Buffalo. So there was eventually 3 file cases like this, and each of those file cases have a port town that we've identified in a number of particular buildings, homes, or whatever that may be in there. But we need to have that variety of images for our design consultant, Bill Bucket, to be able to lay out and give us interesting looking spreads like this in order to have some diversity within the book. But so far during this program, I really only shown you some photographs of the making of the book itself, and not that many photographs from the book. But what I'm going to do is give you, just for those of you who haven't seen the book yet, basically a little sneak preview. I saw some of you folks walking in tonight, by the way, with your books, which I'm glad to see you have those. I have a little piece here of music that's been put together by the Beatty brothers, who put a companion CD together along with the Landmark Society. And we have this CD as a companion to the Erie Canal Legacy book. It's called Songs of the Erie Canal. And Richard had helped the Beatty brothers select a lot of the material that's actually been reproduced within the CD. And I just want you to imagine yourself in a packet boat back along the 1825 period, going from the Albany area over toward Buffalo on a guided tour with Richard at this particular point. And I'm going to try to keep pace because I don't have this totally synchronized electronically as much as I would like to. Most of the time I make it fairly well on time, but otherwise, we'll just have it end as it does. When we are finished, we do have books if anybody's interested in purchasing them, and anybody that did bring their books as well, we'll sign your books for you as well. So, here we go.